Alright, so about a week and a half ago, I made a video called My Code. And I was just really talking about why I am the way I am. But I revealed something in that video. And before wanted to release that video, I thought I should at least explain in more detail that life and how I came out of it. Alright, guys, so this morning I would have put out the first My Code video, but I didn't want to put it out until I made this video, and I'm going to release it on the same day. But welcome back to The Rage. Welcome back to The Raging Atheist. I'm your boy Nakasuchi. Today is going to be a personal video, and hopefully you guys will learn a little bit about myself, especially if you've watched me for a long time. Maybe understand why I am the way I am sometimes. First, I really got to send that shout out to my patrons. You guys are the shit. You guys are supporting me, and you don't have to. You're supporting me because you like the work that I do. You appreciate the work that I do, and I appreciate that about you. So I just want to really send a shout out to you guys. I do it in every video. I try to anyway, but you guys mean a lot, and hopefully we can grow Patreon. Hopefully we can make it bigger, because the channel isn't monetized anymore, so your support goes a really long way. Alright, so in the My Code video, I show you my brands from when I was a gangbanger, and I was in a prison gang for about a year. I got addicted to drugs, I broke into houses, I stole guns, I was selling guns illegally on the black market, I was selling those guns illegally to one of the Mexican cartels. So I deserved to go to prison. I deserved it, and I don't run away from that. I did bad things. I was a 17-year-old kid who hurt his ankle and whose athletic dreams had just been flushed down the toilet. I got hooked on a lot of bad shit, and I went to prison. And I went to prison when most people are graduating high school and going to college. My life had descended down a dark pit really, really fast. In the matter of like maybe a year, it went from bad to really, really fucking bad. And I've always owned up to that. I've never ran away from that. I've never tried to keep it a secret from anybody. But it did affect me. It affected me at a time when I should have been thinking about my future. Well, any future was destroyed. Any future was crushed. So I got sent to prison. I was 17 years old when I committed my crimes, when I was charged with my crimes. I sat in jail. I sat in a very small 16-man jail cell for about 7 months waiting to go to trial. And I went a bit crazy in those 7 months. Didn't see the light of day. Didn't get out hardly at all. The only time I was ever let out was to go to a court date that would just be postponed. So for 7 months I sat there. And you're living an experience that you just can't quite put back into words. You're living an experience that a lot of people just will never learn. Even if they go to prison, and they go at a later time in their life, being a 17-year-old kid, scared out of your mind, there's no putting words to that. So when I finally got to prison, it was somewhat of a relief, but at the same time, it was a nightmare coming true. A relief that I was getting out of that small jailhouse. A relief that I would actually be able to breathe fresh air again, play some basketball, work out. But a nightmare at the same time, because I'd watched Oz on HBO and had all of these nightmares about how prison would be, and they pretty much lived up to that. And I found out really soon. First day there, I've always been a big guy. Back then I was athletic still, I still had my athletic body. I was a hippie kid though. But I was from the South, I'd grown up fighting. I wasn't afraid to fight. And I landed on a hall, Barber Hall, that was run by Folk Nation. It was a folk gang. The gang ran that hall. And immediately they wanted me to join. And I said no. I didn't want to join a gang. I was a hippie kid. I liked the Grateful Dead. You know, I liked Nirvana. You know, we smoked weed, and you know, I'd put past, you know, I'd put away my racism and those redneck Confederate days, and I'd become a druggie, a hippie kid. So I didn't want to join a gang, and they beat me for 3 days. They jumped me, they punched me, they fucked me up. And you didn't go to a guard, because that would just make it a lot worse. And after 3 days, I was just tired of being beaten, so I said yes. And they put me in that circle with 6 men. I believe it was for 30 seconds, but it seemed like 60 minutes. And I got off some punches. I hurt one of them. I broke somebody's nose. But then they were on me. And I remember just that feeling of helplessness, of not being able to fight back. One of the worst feelings I've ever had in my life. After the beatdown, they did their customary thing. They raised me up. They gave me love. They made me part of the family. But then they held me down again, and they branded me on my chest. And they said that it was out of respect because I had stayed true to myself for so long, that I took what I took for 3 days. But I knew it wasn't out of respect. I knew that it was a punishment. I was being punished, and I would have to carry that punishment for the rest of my life. I knew that. And as those scars were healing, and they forced you to peel the scars off so they really set. And every day as I peel those scabs off, I would know that I would have to look at that every time I took a shower for the rest of my life. But once I was in, and I was in survivor mode. I was willing to do anything to get that respect. I was willing to do anything to survive, because I understood quickly, in order to survive in prison, you had to have that backup. You know, they say that loners can be alone, and sometimes they can, but in my experience, those loners got taken advantage of and they got hurt. We would take their shit and we would hurt them. So I learned really quick that you needed that community. You needed that protection. One thing that I did entering prison, after I did that time in jail and was waiting to go to prison, was waiting to go to trial, when they transferred me to prison and they were doing my intake and processing me in, I was honest about my drug use. I told them everything. I told them about the drug rehabs I had been to, about the individual drugs I was on. I told them why I was in prison. And I think I was just a scared little boy, chattering, talking, just giving it all up. But once I got into prison, that scared little boy went away really quick. And you get into survivor mode, and you do what you gotta do. And I did things that I don't like to think about. I hurt people in ways that I don't like to think about. And it's something that I'll live with forever. And it's made me this person I am today. And I have a feeling, if I'd never went to prison, if I'd never experienced that I'd be a completely different person today. And I don't think that it would be a better person. You know, and it was very easy for me to get into that violent place because I had a lot of anger and I had a lot of resentment. I had a lot of that. I was 18 years old then at the time. I had been a star athlete. I was a smart dude. I didn't do as good in school as my brother, but I was a smart guy. And I was in a prison at 18 years old knowing that I had thrown my life away. that I didn't have a chance at a normal future anymore. And I had never really even wanted a normal future. I'd always been creative. I'd always been an artist. I'd always wanted to write books. That was what I wanted to do. But in order to do that, you really needed to go to college if you wanted to have the best chance at that life. And I had thrown that away. I had destroyed that. I had crushed it and left it in a million different pieces. And I was only 18 years old. I had just been told a year and a half before, that I could never play sports again, which was supposed to be my way out, my way into the good life, my way into being able to do whatever I wanted to do in this life. That was taken away. Then my freedom was taken away. I had a lot of anger and I had a lot of resentment, and it was easy to become the monster that I became. It was very easy for me to become that monster. And life becomes normal. You get used to almost anything. You know, I remember the screams underneath the stairwell of people being raped because they didn't have protection. They didn't have a community behind them. And I remember laying up at night when it was happening, thinking that the weak are weak, having no compassion for that person. And now sometimes I lay awake at night and I hear those screams. And I wish more than anything that I had compassion. Even if, you know, I laid there and didn't go to the guards, which the guards had to hear it too. There were cameras everywhere. This shit was allowed to happen. I wish that I had compassion then. That's what haunts me the most at night. But for about a year, life became normal. Every day I would do the work. You know, if we had an issue with the dude, I would be in that group that dealt with that issue. I rose up through the ranks. I became a warlord. I started organizing groups to do what we called gangbangs, which would be jumping a dude. But it started to unravel. It started to get crazier and crazier. And I remember the thing that really started to change everything was what I call the psycho incident. A white kid came onto the hall, and he was called Psycho, and it was because he had mental issues, and he was on drugs for that, and he wasn't all there in the head. And he wanted to join the gang, and my prince and the Set King, they wanted him to join the gang, because everybody joined the gang. If you didn't join the gang, then you had a very bad life. The only people that we didn't recruit into the gang would have been like pedophiles and rapists, you know, and those people, maybe one day I'll tell you the stories about what happened to those type of people. But I saw the issues with Psycho, and I was like, this guy, you know, this guy can't be in the gang. He's not there mentally. He you know, he's going to go and snitch. He's going to go to the guards. He's not going to be able to take it. I was advocating that we should, you know, protect him, but not make him become part of the gang. I didn't win that argument. And they beat him in. And he went to the guards. And for snitching, he got violated. And when I say that, that means you broke the rules, and you have lesser violations and you have major violations. And snitching, well, I mean, that's really a death sentence. Like out in the real world, that would have been a death sentence. But in prison, I guess in prison it could still be a death sentence. My gang, you know, we were all trying to get out. We didn't want more time. You know, every time you did a gangbang, you took the risk of getting more time. But to kill somebody, you're looking at a murder charge. So he had to take it from everybody. So what we did is we all lined up. 2 rows. One here, one here. Psycho came down the middle, and he got a punch from each of us. There was about 40 of us. And halfway through, he couldn't walk no more. I mean, he was down, he wasn't getting back up. Taking those blows, some in the face, some in the gut. Powerful blows, you don't hold back. And somebody got him and walked him through the rest of the line so he could take those blows and take that punishment. A group of us got sent to seg. Now, we never really understood like how they chose the group because it was all of us. But about 7 or 8 of us got sent to segregation for about 2 weeks. And that was the first time that I was involved in something of sending somebody to the sick ward to get them to check off. Checking off means you sign those statements, you say you fear for your life, and they send you to another prison. And they hurt him while he was in the sick ward until he checked off, psycho, and we all got out. I think I was the highest ranking person that they put in segregation. So we never really understood how they chose the people they chose for that. But that was the beginning of the unraveling. That was the beginning of the guards really looking at us, seeing that it's getting out of control. And it was the first time that I really, really, really hurt somebody. Even though I only threw one punch. Psycho was really hurt. That kid got really, really hurt. And that kind of opened my eyes a little bit. Not enough, but a little bit. And then the basketball incident happened. New dude on the yard, big dude, powerful dude, black guy. Already made a group of friends, playing ball. Me and my boys show up. At that time, I had respect. People knew who I was. This guy obviously didn't. We get in a pickup game against him and his boys. At first, everything's going right. But this dude was the only dude really big enough to guard me. I was tearing him up. So he was on me and he was losing. I don't think he really liked losing that one-on-one battle to a white dude. He couldn't have known that I was a fucking sports star, that I had grown up playing basketball my whole life. I think he got frustrated, and he started to get physical in a way you really shouldn't on the ball court, grinding into me. Then he blatantly pinched my nipples a couple times, whispered in my ear that he was going to rape me, that him and his friends were going to rape me. Now, he didn't know who I was. He learned real quick. It didn't happen then. We won our game, took my boys and left, told my prince what happened. My prince went to the king. We set up a gangbang. Next day, he was on the yard, lifting weights with his boys. He had about 4 of them. I rolled up in there with 8 of mine, yoked up his boys while he was on the bench press, grabbed a 25-pound weight, stood above him, watched as the recognition came into his face, and then I dropped that weight on his face. I heard the crunch. Then I heard the screams. Right before I started screaming, because the guards came with their mace. And I was put in segregation once again. This time I was there for a long time. Guy had internal bleeding. Face was all fucked up. I sat in that segregation just thinking about where I'd come. Thinking about so much. Just how far I had fallen. And at that point, I wasn't praying to God anymore. I told you guys I kind of woken up. But I think it was the first time I really knew that I had to change myself. That I was capable of so much harm. When you know that about yourself, when you know that you're capable of that, when you've heard that crunch, I think that there's only really two ways that you can go. You can continue down that path, normalize that path, or you can rebel against that path. Luckily, circumstance, and maybe just some good human beings recognizing what was going on, I don't know. But intervention came shortly after. Because I sat in that segregation, I didn't talk, my boys didn't talk. We once again sent somebody to the sick ward to hurt that man until he checked off. They eventually let me out of that segregation. 3-4 weeks, can't remember. You lose track of time. Because it's just you, a bed, a little bit of space, enough room to get up and take a piss or a shit. And that's it, that's all. Nothing else. I got out of that, and I was put back on to Barber Hall, and I was there for about 2 weeks. And one morning I got woken up real early. And usually when you get woken up real early, it's for a drug test. And I'm like, fuck, I'm not ready for a drug test. Just smoked a joint when I got out of segregation. We celebrated. Somebody, packed one in coming in from work release. Thought I was fucked. You fail a drug test, they add time onto you. We had our ways of dealing with drug tests. I hadn't done it. But it wasn't a drug test. It was a transfer. It was a transfer to a place called Right Turn in Charlotte, North Carolina. Because I had been honest about my drug abuse when I went in, and I think maybe because some people saw the path I was going down and saw maybe some potential. I was well known for, drawing. I would draw comic book characters and put them on people's envelopes that they would send to their families. I mean, it was my little hustle in prison. That's how I made money. A lot of people knew that I wrote. So I think maybe some people saw that here's a kid that could actually be rehabilitated, and he's stuck in this hall, and he's gangbanging, and now he's hurting people really badly. Let's get him out of here and let's rehabilitate him. But whatever happened, I don't know what happened. I know I didn't snitch or tell on anybody or say that I needed to be transferred for my safety. It was a complete surprise to me. But I was transferred to Right Turn in Charlotte, North Carolina, which was a drug rehab for inmates. Very low security. We could wear street clothes. It was basically a drug rehab. Normal life almost. And I was there for the last 8 months of my sentence. And I think about what would have happened if I hadn't. Would I have hurt somebody so bad that I killed them? Would I still be in prison on a murder charge now? I think about that sometimes. But returning to somewhat normal life, going to Right Turn, it didn't change me. The only thing it changed is I wasn't gangbanging anymore. It was one of the things you just did not do at this place. Any sign of gang affiliation, any colors, anything like that was a one-way trip back to prison. To, medium security prison. penitentiary. So nobody was really willing to fuck with that. Some people did. Not with the gang shit, with drugs, which was the other rule. It's a drug rehab, no drugs. You know, when I first got there, they asked me if I had anything in my system. They told me if I lied, I'd be sent back to prison. So I told them, yeah, I smoked a joint, just a couple weeks ago. You know, and I took a drug test. They saw that, and they drug tested me right until I was clean. And then routinely after, if you failed a drug test, you was gone. Back to prison. So nobody was willing to fuck with that. But I didn't really change. I still had that hardened heart. I was still that monster I had become. I learned how to play the game, and I got out. I got out of prison. But during that time at Right Turn, as part of an outreach program for the Cherokee Nation, I met Ted. And Ted came and approached Right Turn and presented, his Native American history and the history of the Cherokee and the spirituality that he had found and how he was able to get off of drugs and use this spirituality to really make himself a good person. And I was fascinated by that because, I had walked away from being a Christian. I'd woken up in prison, and I've spoken about that several times. But I wasn't ready to give up God. And the Native American spirituality just really fascinated me. And I became really obsessed with it, to the point that I would write home letters to my mom and my dad. My dad lived in North Carolina, my mom lived in Michigan. I would write letters to both of them, just talking about how I can see a future now. Like I can see that I don't have to be a bad person now. I was still a bad person, but I could see it. I could see a way out. And that was when my mom started to inform me of our own Cherokee ancestry. She had always just told us we were olive-skinned, darker than most white people. We tan, we don't burn. But she had never talked about our heritage. She rarely even talked about her own past, being raised in Tennessee. But when I was writing home about it, that's when she started telling me about it. Yeah, we have Cherokee blood. We have Cherokee ancestry. And, it just really opened up my eyes to what I am. And I just assumed that probably all white people have. And I think all white people do have mixed blood, at least here in America. You don't have true white-blooded people no more. But we had an extensive amount. My mom had just never told us. We were always raised as white people on both sides of the family. So I made the decision to try to change. Like I was still angry, and I still, you don't get rid of that mentality. You don't get rid of, just that hardness inside of yourself. But I had a desire, because I found something else, something to replace it, something to give me hope. And that was the Native American spirituality. And that was the drug program I was going through. But I wasn't ready to give up drugs. I was ready to start changing who I was. I was ready to stop being a criminal, to stop being violent. But I wasn't ready to give up drugs or drinking. And then, I'm getting out. Time is coming to get out. And I'm talking to Ted about what I should do. Ted wants me to move to the reservation. But I had my dad and my mom and all of my other family just really wanting me to get out of North Carolina, getting away from the people I was hanging out with, changing everything. And I ultimately decided to do that. So after I get out of prison, I go home to Davie County for 4 days, and I move back to Michigan. I think ultimately it was probably a bad decision. I think ultimately I probably should have moved to the reservation. That would have got me away from the old playgrounds, away from the old playmates. It would have introduced me to a spiritual life. But instead I came to Battle Creek. And Battle Creek has an element here. It has poverty here. It has gangs here, thug life here. And I fell right back into it. For the first year I was back in Michigan, I went right back into that gangster mode. I went back into fighting. I sold crack for a while. I was hanging around with all the thugs, all of the people that were just gonna lead me right back to prison. And I had a Christian aunt step in and offered me a chance to move to Grand Rapids, to live with her, to go to college, to change my life. And I remember like when I was sitting at my mom's work, eating breakfast, and my aunt was there and she had offered me that. And I just remember sitting there and I had, this junk in my hair. My hair was long and I had twisted it, and I'm just sitting there twisting my hair, hungover, had been out drinking and drugging all night, and just thinking, yeah, I should do that. And I made the decision right there to do it. And I think that's what really started to get me out of that mentality, was moving to Grand Rapids, going to school, being around normal people, doing normal things. And for about 6 months, I think I really cleaned up my act. But I had become somewhat of a practicing Buddhist. I didn't know, I was a Buddhist that didn't know too much about Buddhism. I was learning about it. I was meditating a lot. And my Christian aunt didn't like that. And I found out like they were contemplating about approaching me to go to some Christian camp for a year. And I lost my shit. I moved out of their house, moved in with some college friends, and commenced to partying my ass off. Eventually met a girl, and we moved in together. But I was just drinking and drugging. But I was coming out of that life. It wasn't a gangbanging life anymore. It was back to somewhat of a normal life. Going to a job, you have a girlfriend, drinking and drugging with your friends. You're not fighting. There was none of that. There was none of that mentality. And I think living that for a while was really getting me out of that gangbanging mentality. So, I think that was the turning point, and that's really how I got out of the gang. I'd stopped gangbanging a couple years before, but that's not it. You have to change your mentality. You have to make yourself a new person. Realize that you can become a new person, completely and ultimately. Now, this new person had his own faults. He was drinking and he was drugging, but he wasn't fighting, he wasn't lying, he wasn't stealing. I was starting to find my code. I was starting to become a better person. Eventually, me and my girlfriend would break up, most likely because I didn't propose. You're with the girl for 2 years, she wants to get married, but you never pop the question. Good girl. Deserved better than me. It crushed me when that fell apart. She moved back in with her parents, and I stayed in Grand Rapids for like a month alone, wallowing in my misery. And then I moved back to North Carolina. Well, first I moved back to Battle Creek for about a month, and then I moved to North Carolina because that's what I did back then. If I got hurt, I moved. When I got back to North Carolina, I moved in with my best friend, the person I went to prison with, drinking and drugging. But I reached out to Ted and hooked back up with him, started going to the reservation. That's another story in itself. And I'm going to tell that story one day. I'd really like to bring on some of my Cherokee friends from the reservation down in North Carolina. Maybe even take a trip down to North Carolina and show you guys the reservation. Film it. But that's another story. But it was during that period that I really just got out of that gangbanging mentality, really found a code, really found, don't lie to people, don't steal from people, don't hurt people, that all humans are humans, that I learned about the red path and how we need to heal the earth and how the earth is important. I was really starting to transform. I was starting to read books of all different types, fiction, fantasy, historical. I was really becoming a different person. And I think that's what it took for me. And I hope it doesn't take that for everybody, because that's really hard to do. Most people aren't willing to do that, to really dedicate themselves to becoming a completely different person, one based on intelligence rather than intimidation. And that's my story. That's how I came out of the gangbanging life. I wasn't a good person yet. I don't think that really happened until my daughter was born. But I was getting better, and I was learning, and I was open to change, and I had already completely changed myself. And I hope, that this video just didn't ramble on too much, and I hope it really explained some things. But I didn't want to just release the first one and not have something really going in depth and talking about that part of my life, because it was a very long time ago. But it's something that I don't run away from it, and I never will. It's something that I'm proud of, because as I said, if none of that stuff had happened, if I hadn't lived that life, I wouldn't be this person. And I like the person that I am, warts and all. I understand that I'm good and bad, that I'm human. And I try to see that in you. I want to thank you for this, if you've sat through this whole thing. Pretty personal. But we shouldn't run from our darkest times, but shed light on them. As always, I want to thank you guys for being here. If you like the video, hit the thumbs up, subscribe to us, share us on your social media. Hit the bell so you're notified every time we do our thing. All of that jazz. Hopefully you know me a little better. Be the conversation. I'll see you soon.